Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is Ruby Price, and today we're here to take a look at a few of the liveries that we've seen so far for the 2026 Formula One season. Joining me today, we've got George Howson
Good afternoon.
and Owain Medford.
Hello.
Hello and good afternoon. We've had a couple of liveries revealed so far for this season. We've seen a couple of cars on track. We are going to just kind of be talking about the liveries from the renders because the cars hit the track in FP1 in Australia, it's all speculation at this point. But yeah, there's also a little bit of news regarding preseason testing we'll cover towards the end of the show, so stick around for that. But first of all, Wayne, let's get started with a team that I think a lot of people had a lot of high hopes over when it came to their obviously introduction to Formula One, but also, in terms of an aesthetic, this is a constructor known quite well for their kind of liveries and things like that as well. Audi, yay or nay for a start, and you've been hyping this team up since they were announced to be joining Formula One. Has it met your expectations?
I've got to be honest. I'm going to go with no. When we saw the concept livery, we thought that would be, interesting, and it's definitely sort of quite, I guess, not new, but a different take on a Formula One livery. Sort of just with the way that with how the colours are broken up actually on the surface. So we don't tend to see sort of vertical lines. So obviously the front of the car, if you've seen it, you'd have to go and look if you're listening on the audio. But the front of the car is all sort of silver, and then you've got the black engine cover just behind the airbox, and then sort of this big day glow orange, which is part of Audi's brand colours. Now that's pretty normal to have the back half, but to have that sort of very definite and I guess abrupt change between the front and the back in the car. It's like two sort of really good liveries have been sort of smashed into each other and reversed into each other, and obviously doesn't look anything like either the concept livery that we saw back in 2023, I think, or any of the sort of the other liveries that we've seen all over Audi's long list of motorsport successful motor cars in racing that they've shown pretty much every opportunity when it comes to this with this new team that obviously they're with them buying Sauber. There's a lot more visually going on in those liveries, whereas this one does seem to be directly used to show off where the sponsors are. And unfortunately, because you'll notice this on the team kit as well, there aren't many right now. So obviously they've got a big title sponsorship in Revolut, but and various others around the car. But apart from that, it does look quite sort of sparse, and it doesn't really look like it's been designed to sort of fit the shape of the car and the fact that it's got very very pronounced side pods, for example, which is complete change to anything Audi's ever done before. So it's okay. It's really middle of the road. I don't personally like it that much. I think there are other better options that they could and have used in the past, more visually interesting. But ultimately, I've always thought that what the in the performance, it's going to be sort of more than skin deep. So hopefully, what they haven't given to the graphics designers and the people designing liveries, they've given to the power unit side instead. But yeah, from Audi, I'd if I was to give this a rating, I'd give it like a solid 4.5 out of 10, I think.
Yeah, I don't think it's the greatest of introductions to Formula One from Audi. And I've seen a lot of people, describe it as a bit of like a video game-esque livery. But George, like, Codemasters have called and they want their My Team livery back. But what do you think about the Audi livery for 2026?
Yeah, to kind of go over phrase from the kids, it's very mid, isn't it? It's okay. It's got the colours of Audi on there. At certain angles, it looks all right. My biggest fear, and obviously we'll talk about Mercedes, my biggest fear was going to be that the Mercedes and the Audi would maybe look quite similar. Of course, German manufacturers, they go with that silver kind of national colour for their cars, but they do look quite markedly different. At certain angles, like from the side, it looks all right. That flash of like day glow red on there, it looks pretty cool to be honest. But there are certain angles, and like from above, which is not going to be the biggest one that's obviously seen from, but it just looks incredibly just like we'll put this section here and we'll colour it this. We'll put this section here, we'll colour it this. It is really, really basic. And you compare it to the livery that was teased a few years ago, and it's like, look at what you could have won. Look at what you could have had. But the important thing for Audi, right? They don't care relatively what it looks like. If it's up there challenging for points, maybe even getting things like podiums in their first year, that's all they're really going to care about. So we'll have to see how they get on with the power unit and everything. But yeah, From a design point of view, it's very bare bones, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it's not, the livery that you introduce your brand to a brand new sport with, like it's not. I don't think this is going to be the one that sticks for Audi. Hopefully 2027 brings something a bit different. But who knows? Owain said it. It's not just about how it looks on track; it's how it performs on track. And I think we'll see some results, and it won't matter how it looks because it'll either be at the front or at the back. But yes, a team known for being at the front, of course, Red Bull. I don't think we needed to really put, if you put your money on this being a bit of a different livery, you'd have lost your money. But they have made some changes to the 2026 car, notably, I think bringing the blue back as well. And I think Max Verstappen pointed out there's actually a white outline to the Red Bull branding that's now on the engine cover. But like, I think this is probably one of the better Red Bull liveries that we've seen in recent years because it does look a little bit different and it's a bit brighter. And at the same time as well, we got the reveal of the Racing Bulls livery, which again is white with a bit more blue on it, but it's definitely evolution rather than revolution, Owain.
Yeah, absolutely. That's sort of the name of the game, really. At Red Bull, I'll start with Red Bull. Obviously the white outline, sort of harking back to maybe 2010, and with the increased amount of blue, yeah, that's sort of tracks as well. So it's a bit back to the roots. Maybe that's to link in maybe with the sort of Ford connection, obviously with the help from Ford Performance on the powertrain. You've got the sort of blue around the wheel rims, so that's a switch from red. I'm not sure I like that so much. I think the red actually worked quite well, despite the sort of clash that sometimes happened with the Pirelli branding on their tires. But apart from that, yeah, it's pretty Red Bull. It seems that they've sort of moved away from indigo and actually they've split the colours into just having black on some parts of it and more blue on other parts. But it's a Red Bull livery. It's pretty back to normal. Maybe that's maybe the increased black is sort of an indication that they've struggled to hit the weight limit or something like that. I doubt it, but that's what you could maybe if you were sort of an armchair sort of analyst, you'd look at that and think that. We've also gone back to gloss, at least in the renders, so I don't know if that's going to be maintained, but I think they might have gone back to gloss, and hopefully the cars look a bit better. I think sometimes matte racing cars don't look amazing, but yeah, Red Bull is pretty run of the mill when it comes to them. Obviously they have a brand and they're going to stick to it, so because of that they've it's fairly expected. As you say, you'd have got great odds, but you'd have lost your money in the end if you're a gambling person on this. So yeah, so far so Red Bull. When it comes to the racing balls, I feel like it looks better, to be honest with you. Again, increase in blue because of the Ford Performance branding. But in particular, I've got to say that now that the teams can choose their wheels, you've got the ability for them to spec exactly what they want, and it's really interesting. Obviously, nothing on the car is real until it turns a wheel in Australia. But we've got white wheels on the Racing Bulls again. Obviously, the last time they ran that was in AlphaTauri back in maybe 2021, I think. But obviously, that's gone away as with the ground effect area. But it's come back, and they look really cool on this car. So as a result of that, it actually looks like a really nice livery. The only sore spot that's for me is the fact that you've got this red, white, and blue livery with a bit of yellow running through, and then they've got the Cash App logo just green right in the middle of it, and it's a bit jarring. There's something about that particular shade of green and where it is that just doesn't look good on a racing car, and numerous teams have tried to do it, but it just hasn't looked quite right. I think you really have to commit to more of that as the branding if you're going to do that. But then we'd obviously end up with a bit of an RGB, why sort of just to hark back to the sort of newspapers with the test pattern that they used to put on the top and bottom. That's what kind of car you'd have out of it. As my voice goes really bad.
It's all right. I'll jump
Excuse
in and
me.
save you, Owain, because yeah, like as you say, like there's a color theory like thing for like making film where it's like 60-30-10, where like you have 60% of like a dominant color, 30% of like a subsidiary color, and then like 10% for like accents. And in this case, it's 60% white, like 30% like yellow, red, and then like 9% yellow, and then you've got 1% green, and your eye is always going to look for it because it's there. It's that one thing that's not quite right, and it's like, yeah, like integrate it a little bit better. Don't do a Mission Minnow Ferrari. Don't do a HP Ferrari. Don't do, there's a Ferrari theme going on here, but it's always like it's that adding that fourth color. Just stick to three, but do it in a way where all the cars don't look the same, and that's obviously the challenge that there is. But yeah, as you say, they are Red Bull liveries. They're almost always going to look the way that they do, but it's how they go about doing it in a way that actually looks interesting. And I think these are pretty decent liveries that we've had from a team where it can get a bit stale. But I think the white for the RB and the Racing Bull, to give it its full name, I think that's the decision to go for because it just looks like a good livery. And speaking of white cars, George, we'll talk about Haas because they've, in terms, obviously Red Bull was more of an evolution. Haas, like there was a lot more black on this car this time last year, but just going for those whites and reds and stuff, and like just the GR logo on the back, like this Haas car looks pretty sweet. I've got to say, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Haas have been doing quite relatively safe and stale liveries for a good while now, but they have revolutionized the design. There's a lot more white on the car. Toyota are a lot more heavily involved with Haas these days, and it shows. You got the Japanese white on there, and obviously the red too. It looks really sweet. You were just talking about 60, 30, 10. I mean, I think they've done this. 60% white, 30% red, and maybe about 10% or so black as well. It's simple, it works. None of the sponsors are jarring. They all kind of mold into there. I can't wait to see it out on track. Obviously, this is just delivery. We don't know what the car itself is going to look like. And shout out to Pirelli as well. We've not really mentioned Pirelli, but they've revolutionized the tires quite a bit this year. You've got the kind of, I forget what you call it, the reef or whatever, kind of round the outside of the tires, and Pirelli's design for the tires has remained the same basically ever since they joined F1 in 2011. This is a really little change that I think really looks nice. So shout out to them, but also shout out to Haas. They've hopefully this will translate to some better results on track for them. They're not the only American team this year, obviously, but the two American teams, them and Cadillac, they've done a very good livery, and Cadillac will do a good job to try and get something as cool as this. Props to them.
Definitely props to them. Like I think I've been very critical of previous Haas liveries and things like that. And, this is a big step away from when they were walking around as mobile Russian flags for a start. But like,
Those are American flags, Ruby. Red, white, and blue. They were obviously American flags. Well, you conspiracy theorist. How could you?
Obviously, and like, we were joking about this in a meeting that we just had, but like, like going back to the 2019 Haas livery, for example, of that black and gold, like, whilst it was for an unmentionable cause, cough, cough, rich energy, it was a decent livery, but like, you always think Lotus when you see those colors, and I think, like, you want your livery to look like you, and I feel like, this is kind of like where I'm picturing Haas these days, and I think it looks really good for them. It might not be a 5-star livery for them, but it's pretty close. But a 5-star podcast is definitely what you would consider we're doing at the moment. And if you do think that is the case, please take 5 to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you're listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel, consider helping us out with a like and a subscribe. And also, if you're not already subscribed to us on Patreon, why not check us out on Patreon, where you can get exclusive content and behind the scenes access as well. And Owain, let's take a look at the Mercedes, because Mercedes have, we joke about Red Bull looking quite similar. I think over the last couple of seasons, Mercedes have taken that approach as well, of evolution, not revolution. But this is basically last year's car with some not Adidas stripes on the side, because they're not Adidas, they are AMG.
Yeah, it's a bit weird to be honest with you that they've not sort of integrated Adidas whatsoever, bearing in mind how sort of deep the branding seems to go. But maybe they're just leaving that for the team kit, and that's all. Obviously, that's a hugely iconic brand, and it does not need any help, advertising itself. I think, yeah, Mercedes has always generally been about sort of evolution of delivery. It's not even since sort of 2010, it's not really changed that much. It's iterated obviously year over year, but the biggest changes have come as they've gone all black in 2020, and then back to silver in 2022, and then back to black because they needed it for the weight in 2023. But after that, I didn't think that the liveries looked particularly good. I think maybe the 2022 cars, they either needed a very complex livery or a sort of block color thing, and that sort of didn't really work with what Mercedes tried to do has tried to do, sorry, for the last couple of years. And I don't think that that's a particularly good livery on those cars. Translate it to these, and it looks it looks good again. There's something about just separating out the front wing and moving it slightly further away from the nose that has meant that that big hit of silver sort of, I think it just looks little bit better. It sort of pops a little bit more against the black. Obviously, you kind of hamstrung with Mercedes because you have to get in the silver somehow. Black's got to be in there another way, and then you've got the Petronas green running all the way through. But generally, I don't think this is a bad livery whatsoever. I think it looks really, really good on the shapes of the car that they've decided to go with. I think that the sort of integration of the AMG stripes looks good. I think so. I saw someone online saying it looks like the sort of, there's probably a technical name for it that I don't know, but the sort of feathers on the back of an arrow. So when you look at the car from above, it really does look like a sort of a silver arrow or a dart. It really, the flights, Ruby's now telling me. Hopefully it doesn't take flight. There's other Mercedes that's happened with in endurance racing. I got it
You
in
just
there.
got to get
There
it
it
in there.
is.
You're
Oh.
setting it right up for me. It's too easy.
New
It's too
year,
easy.
same old Owain Medford. Honestly, never go changing.
Would I ever? But no, it looks really good. You're making it too easy, just like the job for the Mercedes livery designer. But it looks so good. Hopefully, it's as quick on track, and they have found another 11 million horsepower or something with a compression ratio change or whatever that everyone's getting up in arms about. Yep, it's not, the season hasn't even started, and we've got people protesting technical regulations. But for the time being, it looks very Mercedes this, and it looks like a great car, and hopefully it performs well for them.
It is certainly very F1 to be at this stage of the year, which is January, and we're having technical protests. And before we talk about the next team, George, Mercedes have stolen a sponsor from the team we're about to talk about, which is Microsoft, and of course it's now replacing the Ineos on the airbox. But let's talk about the team that they've stolen that sponsor from, which is Alpine. And this is very familiar, but will it matter? Because we're mostly going to see it at the back of the grid anyway.
You said it before I got the chance to there. I mean, I'm not even joking. On my second screen now, I have the 25 livery and the 26 livery, and they are almost literally identical. The only difference, genuinely, I can find between them is that the one in 25 has a little bit more carbon over the engine cover. However, when we get to see the actual car out on track in Australia, it wouldn't surprise me if that's gone black carbon fiber to save some weight. I mean, Alpine, my goodness. I mean, it's so French, isn't it? It's completely style or trying to do style over substance. They had a full event for this, a live stream online to reveal the exact same livery they had 12 months ago. And they revealed it on a cruise ship as well, which I feel like the joke almost writes itself there. Alpine are a bit of a sinking ship right now. And they reveal their they reveal their livery on a ship. Maybe it'll look better on their car when they actually reveal their car, but it's the exact same as it was before. They'll be hoping the Mercedes engines will help, compared to the Renault one they had before. But genuinely, I'm not even joking. It is the exact same livery as they had 12 months ago. The sponsors have changed a little. That's it. It still looks a bit of a mess, and it'll be a bit of a mess out on track in Australia, no doubt.
Yeah, and I think like when we did the livery show last year, I think Alpine was generally considered to be one of the least the least enjoyed liveries that we had, and partly as well is the weird compression around the BWT on the side pod. Like they can't fit it on properly is the thing as well. I think that makes it look worse. And this obviously could just be like issues with the rendering and stuff. But if you were going to do a render, why would you do a render in a warehouse? And they forgot to remove another car from the background. Just looking at the images that we're looking at, I mean, it would be very Alpine to do so, but just the way that the BWT is squashed like on the side pod just looks like, well, we have to put it on there, but we don't have the customization unlocked yet in order to get a different variation of this livery. But we've seen better BWT liveries even from Alpine, and I just don't think they're doing a good job with it. But yeah, as I say, will it matter? They're more than likely going to be running around in 21st and 22nd for, at the very least, the start of the season from what we expect to see. And Owain, let's talk now about the last of the liveries we're going to discuss today, which is Ferrari. And obviously, the headline, according to the internet, is the HP logo and how much it's ruined this livery. Do you think it's just the HP logo? And what do you actually think about Ferrari at the moment?
I think with the HP logo, just to touch on that, it's where it's placed on the engine cover itself is fine. I think that's fine. There's enough of a contrast that it kind of looks okay. With just on the engine cover, everyone's getting up in arms about how there's 5 HP logos, and I'm like, well, welcome to sponsorship. They are, you know, they've clearly paid to have a lot of. They've clearly paid a lot of money to Ferrari to have very prominent branding all over this car. So if if you're new to Formula One, very clearly you won't sort of you'll get used to this. But yeah, apart from that, I don't think it's a very particularly good livery from Ferrari. I think there's some tweets that I've seen online of people, changing the sort of the secondary red stripe that they've got in that white section around the driver to green to include the Italian flag, and that does clean it up a little bit. That does make the car look a little bit better. Otherwise, I think it's the angle they've picked or something like that, but it just doesn't the line work of where the way they've brought the white in doesn't look particularly good. I think there's something about it that isn't I don't know how to describe it, but it almost looks a bit sort of, it looks like a sort of rowing boat almost. It's such a weird bulbous shape, just in the way that the colors sort of interact with the bodywork and how it makes the car sort of visually appear. I just don't think it looks particularly good. It's there's a lot of black on the car as well. I think they could have moved the white around and it would have looked maybe a little bit better. And obviously, HP have gone for better branding, which is why they've chosen the particular logo they have. But there are other logos that HP have that I think would look better in silhouette and would look, better in white or black, depending on what they're contrasting against. They haven't chosen that, and as a result, you've got this weird mishmash of colors that doesn't look quite right. I get that it's aping back to the 1970s with the the 312 T, T1 to 4 and things like that, but it just doesn't somehow meld together in a particularly sort of cohesive way, and it just doesn't look, like I say, it doesn't look quite right. I think back to the drawing board for Ferrari. Just paint it all red. Just paint it all red, and it would look fine. You've got some colors, stick to it. But it's amazing how often Ferrari seem to mess that up.
Yeah, or like do go even more traditional Ferrari and make it all yellow or something like that. Do something a bit different. But in true Ferrari fashion, whilst they were running it like for some filming time, it appeared to break down on the circuit as well. And it's like, back to the drawing board, halt development for 2026, just focus on 2027 now, get rid of any more like mental health that Lewis Hamilton has. But, George, just one last thing from you then on this Ferrari livery. What do you think? Like, do you agree with Owain? Do you think like Ferrari needs to get rid of the white, get rid of HP? Obviously, we live in the world of F1 with like big sponsorships and things like that, so it's not as feasible. But like, what do you think of the Ferrari for 2026?
It could have looked really great, to be honest. I mean, I don't have a big problem with the white being on there in principle, but I think the white being on there so largely with that HP logo. I mean, if they made that section red and had the HP logo as just keep the HP letters themselves actually white and have the outside just be a different kind of white with a little kind of border on them or something like that, I think it'd look quite nice. And it's not, I mean, again, having blue on a Ferrari like that, that's not too bad. I mean, the rear wing with the IBM, I don't think that looks too terrible with the logo being there like that. But yeah, there are some other problems as well when it comes to this too. There is a lot of exposed carbon fiber. It's quite well hidden, as it usually is when it comes to these things, because it's kind of like in a shadow. But that car does have quite a thicker front wing. If you actually take a really close look at it, you can see that. But yeah, for me, I mean, they should have just had more red on there. The only one that can kind of get away with logo being not white or red on a Ferrari really is Shell, just because they're always there. That yellow does go well with it, so it kind of works. But it could have looked a lot better. And then you've got the kind of sawtooth edging thing they've got on on the engine cover as well. And I feel like if that was red, that would look a lot less choppy. But because it's in white, it almost highlights it. And I'm sure there's some very technical aerodynamic reason why they've gone for this very sharp looking shark fin thing on there, but it just looked like a bit of a hack job, does it? I mean, it looks very like, yeah, just take this section of the car out, send it out, it'll be fine. It's like it's almost got damage on it. So yeah, I mean, if this is the best car in 2026, they won't care if it's there at the top of the podium, just like Audi. But from a purely design point of view, maybe it'll look better on the actual car when we see it in 26 in Melbourne. I'm hoping it will, because on this it looks, yeah, it's not Ferrari's best effort, put it that way.
It's certainly not Ferrari's best effort. What do you think, listening along, like, what do you think has been the best livery that we've seen so far? Are there any of the soon to be revealed liveries that you think, there's some potential for? And before we finish off this show, we've obviously had some news about preseason testing, and that is that in terms of there will be some absences from Williams and McLaren in terms of preseason testing. But Owain, fill us in with some context, and what does this potentially mean for these two teams?
Yeah, so it's a bit odd this year with preseason testing. Obviously, it's a big regulation change. So, similarly to what we got in 2022, we're having a sort of closed private test. The reason for that is that's organised by the teams. It's a 5 day shakedown in Catalonia. You need to know the context of that, just because that means that the teams are only permitted to run 3 of the 5 days. If you turn a wheel on a day that and set a lap, that means, or basically take the car out, that means that the clock for that day has started. So you can't sort of mix and match. So you'll have seen some news stories out there that McLaren is not going to run the first day. That's totally within their rights. I think people are just getting up in arms about that. It's just up to the teams when they choose to do their running. So McLaren, I think, are delaying going to that test, or at least just not going to be there for at least the first day, just to apparently work on their car a little bit more. Maybe there's some parts that need just an extra day before being shipped out. The bigger issue is Williams, who are going to miss the entirety of that test, and they are going to do a virtual testing program. I don't understand how that's going to work, but surely, I imagine James Vowles probably knows what he's talking about. But it's not a good look when they supposedly turned off the development of the 2025 car to get ready for the 2026 car, and now the 2026 car isn't going to run at the sort of earliest opportunity. And you really need to get the mileage on these cars. Obviously, they've got the Mercedes power unit, but they need to understand how their systems work. And if you're running 3 days down on the testing, that's obviously going to set you back by those 3 days. Yeah, not a great look for Williams, and it also echoes back to those 2021 when Williams came up with an illegal car and missed some days of testing, and obviously we know how that went in terms of season. That cost Paddy Lowe his job. But yeah, I think it's going to be tough for Williams. Hopefully they've done great work on the car, but if you can't finish races with it because of reliability, all that goes to all of that is moot. But yeah,
Yeah.
not a great look for Williams.
Yeah, I was gonna say it does harken back to like those, like kind of the beginning of the Williams death spiral that put them in the position of, being that slowest team on the grid for a long time where, you could see George Russell doing bits on a Saturday, George Howson then making, bold predictions of points and just, nothing coming from it. But yeah, it's a big thing to miss, like, a couple of days of testing, at the very least, missing all of a shakedown session. George, this could potentially cost Williams all of the benefit that they've gained by, sitting out 2025 from a developmental standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not just about the teams as well, it's about the drivers too. I mean, Esteban Ocon has been saying, that driving these 2026 cars is going to be totally different to anything any of the drivers have ever experienced before. It's going to be totally different. They have to paraphrase Yoda in Star Wars, they're going to have to unlearn what they have learned. It's going to be totally different. And so it's not just from the teams to try and get data and to try and get used to the car, it's also for the drivers too, because things like the active aerodynamics, things like a completely kind of philosophy around the energy deployment and stuff like that, that's all going to really, really come in handy when they get to Australia. I mean, it's not panic stations. This is a relatively small test. It's the first opportunity to be able to do so. So it's obviously a big loss to not have Williams there. But they've got 2 more tests in Bahrain. And I mean, if they don't make those, then they are in deep trouble. But it's not quite panic stations. They might have just realized, look, the car's just not ready. We've come into this problem here, but we know how to get around it. The virtual testing session is bizarre. I mean, they can do that anyway. They have a simulator anyway. Pop Gran Turismo 7 in. If you want to do a virtual testing, other games are available as well. But, if you want to do a virtual testing, we do a virtual testing session in our spare time every other day, So I don't know why they're doing that or weren't doing that anyway. I don't know if it's just trying to save face by saying that, but yeah, not great for Williams, but we'll see how it all evolves. It could well be that they get around whatever problem this is, they get to Bahrain, and then, they've got one of the best cars on the grid. So we'll wait and see with that.
It is a very James Bowles thing to be like, we're going to do a virtual testing thing because he's obviously a very data driven guy with an engineering background. Maybe that's how they're spinning it. But yeah, as you say, like, they have access to all of this stuff to do virtual things anyway. Why would you take time away from the thing which, is invaluable, which is track time? The thing that is limited by the FIA to make sure that, teams aren't just spending and wasting resources on it. But yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thank you very much both for your input in this. Wayne, is there anything you want to plug at this opportunity?
Only our Grid Talk social channels. So available on all the social media services with the @ you can find Grid Talk. That's at Grid Talk UK. And that's where you can keep up to date with all things Grid Talk.
Yeah, definitely do go and check those out. Oh, Wayne, George, is there anything you want to plug?
Is this the new Louis on Wayne thing? Am I getting bundled in there too?
Have we got new law?
Everybody on this podcast is now called Owain.
Well, if you want to see more from Owain, you can head over to Formula Reports. We've got plenty of articles, obviously, on Substack, biggest F1 community on Substack in the world. F1chronicle.com's got even more content than that. But for Formula Reports, in terms of social media, you can get over to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I think we're going to get TikTok potentially going this year as well at some point too. And also we are F1 Chronicle on MSN as well. Cheers, Ruby. Really enjoyed this today.
No worries, it's been fun. If people want to hear more from me, I am at Ruby Rose Price on Instagram. Don't bother following me on anything else. I don't really use the rest of them at this point now. But yeah, if you want to hear more from Grid Talk, it's available on YouTube as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search Formula 1 Grid Talk for our back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. Thank you to Jared Bradley and Holly Eagle for supporting us on Patreon. If you want to support the show further, why not sign up to our Patreon for exclusive content? And there's a bunch of different tiers there as well that unlocks different things. Also, make sure you subscribe to the first to know when each new episode is released. We'll be back soon with plenty more F1 content and the rest of the liveries for 2026. Thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye.